On December 30th, 2022, Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, of Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, was arrested by a SWAT team executing a search warrant that was put together by the Pennsylvania State Police, assisting the Moscow Police Department, the Idaho State Police, and the FBI as the lone suspect in the Idaho State college student murder case that has been gripping the nation for the last 6 weeks. Prior to this arrest, there were no suspects, there was no leads, there was no indication that the police knew anything that was going on. As the information is starting to come out now, however, they've been on this guy's tail pretty much from the beginning. Very early on in the case, they had identified a white 2013 Hyundai Elantra that was seen around the time of the incidents in the area where the murders were committed. And they had placed a bulletin on the Moscow State Police website. And from what we're hearing now, from every indication that everybody who's been following this case, it's believed that that bulletin, specifically where they published pictures of his vehicle and were asking for the whereabouts of the owner, caused him to flee back to Pennsylvania. We're going to share with you right now what we know about Bryan Kohberger. Of the limited information that is out there, this is what we know. He's 28 years old. He was arrested at his parents' house in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, again by the SWAT team, and it was something that had been in place for weeks. Now, the police department, law enforcement isn't saying anything about what's going on with this case. They are being pretty tight-lipped, and the indications are that state law is prohibiting them from letting any details of the case out. But it's going to come out, and this looks like, for all intents and purposes, this is not going to be a quick plea. This looks like it's going to go to trial. We have somewhat of a psychological profile of Bryan Kohberger and a possible motive. I mean, all speculation, but we do have a possible motive for why he committed these acts, if indeed he's the one that committed the acts. But this is what we know. He's going to stand trial tomorrow morning at around 8:30 a.m. Pennsylvania time for an extradition hearing where he's fully expected to waive extradition, which is going to have the effect of having him transported back to Idaho, where he's going to be facing 4 counts of first-degree murder and felony burglary. He's currently being held without bond in Monroe County Correctional Facility in Pennsylvania. And I don't know specifically what the timeline looks like for that specifically, but inevitably he's going to be transported to Idaho to face those charges. For those curious, the extradition hearing is basically whether or not he is the person that they are looking for in Idaho. He's not denying, as his public defender is stating, he's not denying the fact that he is Bryan Kohberger. He is denying that he committed the crimes, but they are looking for him. He's not denying that he's a person they're looking for, and therefore that's all they have to find in order to extradite him back to Idaho. So according to his public defender, it's a mere formality, which he's correct. That's pretty much how that's going to work. This is what we know about Bryan Kohberger. He was born November 21st, 1994. He completed an associate's degree in psychology from Northampton Community College in 2018. He completed bachelor's work at DeSales University. He attended graduate school at the same college, DeSales University, earning his master's degree in 2022. And at the time of his arrest, he was a PhD student studying in the field of criminology and acting as a teaching assistant at Washington State University, which is about a 15-minute drive from Moscow, Idaho, and about 15 minutes from where the murders took place. He had just finished his first semester of PhD work at Washington State University. Prior to the incidents, he had worked as a security guard at Pleasant Valley School District from 2018 to 2021. He had an apartment in Pullman, Washington, about 10 miles from where the murders took place, and he was currently working as an assistant instructor in 3 undergraduate criminal justice courses, all being taught by the same college professor. As far as anything else, again, there's going to be a lot that comes out between now and the time of trial, and there's going to be a lot of speculation. What I was most curious of, when I caught wind of these of the arrest, they were talking a lot about well, there was a lot of speculation about who might have committed the murders. There was a TikTok guru who reads tarot cards claiming that she is psychic that was accusing a college professor of committing the murders. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but that college professor is presently suing that TikTok psychic for defamation, for essentially stating that she committed the murders and she knew because she has a connection to wherever she gets her psychic information from. Other than that, there was a video going around of surveillance footage. It's not even surveillance footage. It was streamed footage from a Grubhub cart that was near the time of the murders that two of the victims had caught an Uber from the night that they were essentially murdered. And in that video, there was an individual in a hoodie that people had called into question about whether or not he was possibly a suspect in all of this. He was acting strangely. He didn't appear to know the girls. However, he was fairly interested in them. He spoke to another individual in that video upon figuring out that they had left, and it appeared that he had followed them home. They actually spoke to, there was a bearded gentleman in that video who stated that, I don't know, the guy in the hoodie, he was a nice guy. I don't know. It didn't appear like there was anything sinister going on. It just appeared that maybe he was concerned with whether or not they were going to get home okay. And the speculation was whether or not this guy had bigger plans other than seeing them get home. At any rate, he is not Bryan Kohberger. He's not the guy that got arrested. Of all of the theories out there, the police certainly believe that they have their guy. All indications from everything that's come out in the news indicates that Bryan Kohberger is the one and only suspect. There's been some insinuation that they linked him to DNA evidence, and they did it through collected DNA evidence from the murder scene. They ran it through a database, and they were doing second to third or fourth degree searches for DNA, essentially looking for relatives. And it's not 100% clear about how they arrived at Bryan Kohberger, but they seem pretty confident that he is the one and only suspect, that they've got their guy, and they've made statements as such. There is a YouTuber out there named Dr. Todd Grand. He's one of my favorite YouTubers. He has a channel out there where he does psychological profiles of interesting folks, and he just did one of a miniature psychological profile of Bryan Kohberger and offered his thoughts. Dr. Todd Grand is a actual psychologist, and so I took from him some information regarding a psychological profile. So here's what we know about Mr. Kohberger. He does not have a criminal history. There were some reports that there were incidents at a brewery in Pennsylvania not so long ago where he was aggressively flirting with a couple of female bartenders, but just that he was acting creepy with some female bartenders and maybe getting a little too aggressive with them and creeping some folks out. And there's going to be more and more stories that come out like that, but that's just one of the incidents that's been reported. He's described as incredibly smart, has trouble fitting in, highly intellectual, described as a genius by those who know them, genius level intelligence, and more so, he wanted people to understand that he was smarter than them. For example, he would describe things in an overly complex manner. He wanted people to understand that he was smarter than them. And so he would go out of his way to describe things in an overly intellectual manner so as the person that he was speaking to would understand that he was their intellectual superior, which in my experience, I would argue that kind of has the opposite effect. Usually, genuinely highly intelligent people have this uncanny ability of taking an incredibly complex subject, making it so that everybody could understand, such as Neil deGrasse Tyson, such as a Carl Sagan, such as a Johnny Cochran, even Albert Einstein. When he would explain his theory of relativity, he wouldn't do it in this grandiose way, where you would have to have a PhD just to understand what he was saying. He would explain it so that you get the gist. Oh, time and space could bend, sort of like a trampoline. I get that. He have ways of doing that. To me, the fact that he tried to over-intellectualize conversations just leads to more evidence of his obvious insecurities. He was bullied for being socially awkward, mostly by women. There's reports that girls would throw things at him when he was a young boy growing up. There was some indication that he had weight issues or problems keeping weight off. And classmates who interacted with him at Washington State University also described him as being socially awkward. At some point, he took up boxing or studied boxing. No indication that he actually fought competitively, but he would be overly eager to start physical fights with people probably that didn't have any experience boxing to attempt to physically dominate them. Most of the indications that as he became older, he went from being the person that was being bullied to bullying folks. Other reports from his classmates at Washington State University stated that he would attempt to make people uncomfortable by staring at them, which is pretty much one of the most creepy things you could possibly do to somebody. Interestingly, after the murders took place, he was described as being more animated, more talkative, more, loose with his personality. But whenever anybody would actually bring up the case, they would, he would get quiet again and stop being so loose, I guess. So while he was a student at his master's program, he was conducting research, I'm assuming as the directive of the program that he was in. And while he was seeking out participants, he was particularly interested in wanting to know and understand how emotions and psychological traits influence people's decisions while they were in the process of committing crimes, which is a very specific avenue of study, I would say. He was interested he was very interested in the way that the mind worked. He really wanted to understand what people were thinking and feeling in given situations. And there's some speculation from actual psychologists, particularly Dr. Grand, spent some time talking about this, that he believes that his interest in human behavior, interactions, the way that people thought and how it affected people's decisions was probably the result of his inability to feel emotions and or empathy, as in perhaps he was a psychopath and just simply unable to relate. And I urge you to take a look at the video that Dr. Todd Grand put up, and I will have a link below because I think it's worth watching. It's about a 13-minute video where he goes through a psychological profile of his analysis of the case. So there is an expected personality profile that was constructed by law enforcement that would aid in who they believe that they were looking for. And the psychological profile is that the killer was expected to be approximately 20 to 40 years old, and Bryan Kohberger, he's about 28. He was supposed to be poorly educated, unemployed, or underemployed, which is not the case of Bryan Kohberger. He was employed, and he was very highly educated. He was supposed to have had a series of failed relationships, which it's unclear with Mr. Kohberger whether or not he had any relationships whatsoever. The killer would be impulsive and irresponsible with a long history of criminal behavior, which there's no criminal record for Mr. Kohberger, so that's not really a match. Whether or not he was impulsive and irresponsible, not many PhD students tend to fit that profile. He would be antisocial. However, as Dr. Grand points out, there was no indication that he was antisocial. He very much wanted to be social. He just didn't know how to do it, which is to say that he was just socially awkward, which is not the same as being antisocial, which is having a fear of being in society or a fear of socializing with people. He was just awkward and he really, really, really wanted to connect. He wanted to have relationships with girls. He wanted to fit in. He wanted to try to make connections. Every time he tried to do that, however, he just was rejected one way or the other. The killer, according to the FBI profile, was supposed to have been socially awkward, a creepy loner, which seems to point towards Mr. Kohberger. And he would have had an interest in law enforcement, and the gentleman is enrolled in a PhD program for criminology. So I think that he fits that profile to a T. As far as a possible motive, it's been suggested from the information that's come out that he had a desire to be dominant sexually or physically in some way. And although it's unclear he has any connection to the victims whatsoever, The parents have indicated that he may have had some connection to one of the female victims. There has been for a long time now, not just when this arrest was made, but when we had no idea that there was a suspect in sight. There was some indication whoever committed the murders probably had some kind of connection, that it was a targeted murder. And the reasoning why was, well, one of the reasons why was because the injury sustained by one of the 4 victims was much more substantial than the other 3 victims, suggesting that he was targeting that one person and that the other people, the other 3 victims, were simply collateral damage. And although it's unclear that he had any connection whatsoever to any of the victims based on the information that's out there, there has been some insinuations from some of the family members. It is believed that that would have been one of his clear motives, that perhaps he had a negative interaction with one of the female victims that led them to being targeted. Now, the state doesn't have to prove that there was any motive whatsoever. They just have to prove that this guy committed the acts. Motive is something that we use to attach for, we have a desire to attach reason to why bad things happen. One possible motive as to why is that this was a growing rage within Mr. Kohberger from the time that he was a young boy. From a young age, he struggled to fit in. He wanted to be accepted, but every single time he made any attempt whatsoever, he would be brutally rejected physically and mentally. He was probably very interested in women, just unsure or unclear about how to approach women, and for that reason, his interest in women was oftentimes rebuffed over time. And he's a 28-year-old man. Over time, he became increasingly frustrated and more interested in violence, and his interest in violence led to him wanting to seek revenge against those who had rejected him. He must have formed some kind of connection with one of the victims. And, from every indication, the victims might not have even known that this person had them on their radar. He could have passed them on the street. He could have found them on social media. He could have seen them in the grocery store. They may not have even known his name or that he had any interest in them whatsoever. He may have interpreted their behavior, whatever it was, as a sort of rejection. And they might not have even directly rejected him. It could have just been some kind of a slight. Maybe he tried to get their attention and they didn't hear him, and but whatever happened, he may have interpreted something that they did as a rejection. And on November 13th of 2022, he sought revenge. He wanted to send a message that he was powerful, that he was dominant, and that he was somebody to be feared. And so he used a murder weapon that's been described as a large Rambo-style knife and brutally murdered, causing as much carnage as he possibly could for individual students, perhaps targeting just one of the females and taking the opportunity to murder everybody else that he could find. It's been suggested that he was very lucky to get away when he got away, as opposed to being apprehended very quickly, which I'm not so sure if I agree, because nobody really knew about the murders until maybe 9 hours or so after the acts were committed. And according to Dr. Grand, although this guy wanted to get away with the murder, he's just as excited by the prospect of him having been arrested and everybody talking at length about this case. He's likely to deny everything and wants to carry this out as long as he possibly can. Now, we're going to be discussing this more fully this week on our full podcast because it's worth spending some time on. But the 4 victims in this case, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonclaves, Madison Mogen. There were 4 college students from the University of Idaho. Xana, she was 20 years old. She was a gymnast, a volleyball player, soccer star. She was majoring in marketing. She was looking forward to graduating within the next year or so. She was in a relationship with Ethan Chapin, who did not live at the apartment at the time of the murders. He was just there with his girlfriend, spending the night. He was 21 years old himself. He was majoring in recreation sports and tourism management. Kaylee Gonclaves was 21 years old. She was born in Concord, California. She had moved to Idaho when she was young. And she was best friends with the other victim in this case, Madison Mogen. Kaylee was studying to become an elementary school teacher while they're studying at the University of Idaho. Madison Mogen was 21 years old. She was from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, an original resident of Eugene, Oregon, where she was born in May of 2001. She was an excellent student. She had made the dean's list every semester that she was at the University of Idaho, and she was looking forward to graduating, presumably this year, with a bachelor's degree in marketing. All four were murdered at 1122 King Road, which was a 3-story house that had 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, that was located on a hill in a heavily wooded area, which would have provided a lot of cover if Mr. Kohberger were to be the one to committed the murders. As far as the living situation, Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana all lived together. There was 2 other students that lived there, Dylan and Bethany. They were not murdered. They survived, and they were the ones that found the victims the night after they were murdered. There was some indication that a 6th student lived with them there at the house because his name was on the lease, but after further investigation, it appears that the 6th student was not living there at the time of the incident. Maddie and Kaylee stayed on the 3rd floor. Xana and her boyfriend Ethan, on the night of the murder, stayed on the 2nd floor. Bethany and Dylan, the survivors, were fortunate to be on the 1st floor. And in case you were wondering, every report that came out, there's no denying that Bethany and Dylan were present in the house at the times the murders at the time the murders took place. But they have stated that they didn't hear a thing. They didn't hear a thing, despite what was happening just right above them. So what we know regarding the timeline, on November 12th, 2022, there are photographs of all 6 occupants of the house that night being photographed together. There is one particular that is floating around the internet that probably everybody now has seen. It's the famous one with the 4 victims and the 2 survivors on either side being blurred out. And it's believed that that is the last photograph that was ever taken of the 6 together. That evening, Ethan and Xana attended a frat party just a couple of minutes away, which they arrived to that party around 8 p.m. at night. At around 10 p.m. that night, Kaylee and Maddie went to the Corner Club, which is a sports bar in downtown Moscow. At 1 a.m., Bethany and Dylan, it's unclear about where they went, but they each went their separate ways that night and returned around the same time, around 1 o'clock, 1:08 a.m. That morning. At 1:30 a.m., Kaylee and Maddie left the Corner Club, that sports bar, which is around 1:30 a.m. They were seen on a Twitch live stream by a grub truck that was parked a couple of minutes away, and there's been plenty of speculation over that video, and that was the video that contained the gentleman in the hoodie that was believed to initially have been a suspect, but he's been cleared of any wrongdoing. And again, they've since arrested Bryan Kohberger, so he's in no way, as far as we know right now, involved in any of this. At 1:45 a.m., Ethan and Xana returned home from the frat party that they were attending. At 1:55 a.m., Kaylee and Madison arrived back to the house from the Grubhub truck. The last known activity that we have from any of the victims occurred between 2:26 and 2:44 a.m. Kaylee had placed some calls to her ex-boyfriend, a gentleman by the name of Jack, around 6 times between those times. And between 2:44 a.m. and 2:52 a.m., Maddie had tried to call the same person from her phone. Total of 9 phone calls placed to this individual named Jack. And at 2:52 a.m., that was the last phone activity from either person, either occupant of the house or any of the victims, and then that was it. Sometime between 3 in the morning and 5 in the morning, a figure approached the house, slid open the back door, went into the house armed with an extremely deadly, what's believed to be a large Rambo-style serrated knife, and savagely murdered Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, and Xana. The coroner said that they must have been asleep because some of the victims actually had defensive wounds as if they were trying to fight back. All of them were stabbed to death. There were no signs of sexual assault. And again, the 2 roommates said that they had heard nothing. Around midday on the 13th, Bethany and Dylan found Xana and Ethan on the 2nd floor and Maddie and Kaylee on the 3rd floor. They called the police, and when the police got there, one of the 2, I don't know if it was Beth or Dylan, but one of the 2 had fainted. And that's what we know. That's what we know of the house. Or that's what we know of the incident so far. So this is the house. This is the house in question. And if you could see, this is the 1122 King Road. It's a 3-story house. And what we're looking at is the front entrance. Basically, if you were living there, this is the driveway where you would park. And this door, where you can see this gentleman standing right there, is the main entrance of the house. So if you were thinking about enrolling in a school that is truly surrounded by what is strictly a college town, whereby the entire city revolves around the school, and you don't mind that it's not in a major urban populated major city, well then the University of Idaho has traditionally been a great choice. Now, Northern Idaho, which is pretty much as safe a town as you could hope to live in. I mean, if it has a population of 25,000 people, and of those 25,000 people, 10,000 of those individuals were college students enrolled at the University of Idaho. If you're thinking about enrolling in a school that is truly surrounded by what is strictly a college town, whereby the entire city revolves around the school, and you don't mind that it's in a major urban populated major city such as LA or New York, then the University of Idaho was a great choice. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if honestly, if you're looking for the college experience, it really doesn't get a whole lot better than that. Now, this is the house where the murders took place. And if you look, what we're looking at right now is the opening driveway where you would park. If you lived there, this door that you can see this gentleman, it looks like there's somebody standing there in the doorway. That's the main entrance that leads into the first floor. This brick building here is a dormitory style apartment building. It looks like this road kind of snakes around this way. And down here, it's going down a hill. Again, around the corner, a residential, dormitory style, college town style neighborhood. Now, this is at the entrance of the front door. This door right here leads directly where we were looking at before. This stairway goes up to the second floor. These are the bedrooms right here. This is bedroom number 1. There's another bedroom right here where Bethany and Dylan were staying on the night of the incident. If you go up the stairs, this is the second floor, and why that's significant is because if you go straight into the kitchen, you're looking at, this would be the kitchen right here. This sliding glass door is the only other entrance to the house, and it leads to the second story directly into the kitchen. And if you can see these trees here off into the distance, it's this wooded area which would provide significant cover to somebody trying to enter and exit in secrecy without being detected. Now, this is the kitchen. If you were entering from the sliding glass door, you would come directly here into the kitchen. And directly into the kitchen, from the kitchen, is a bedroom. Literally, you're walking into the bedroom if you're entering in through the sliding glass door. Now, from the kitchen, going into the hallway, there's a couple of different avenues. The obvious one, the very first door that you're facing, would lead to this bedroom here, which is perhaps where Xana and Ethan may have been staying on the night of the incident. That to me is not clear. It was either this bedroom. There is another bedroom that goes into the living room. This is the living room area. This is bedroom number 2. But just from the look of it, if you're choosing bedrooms and you have your pick of the 2 on the second floor, I'm not sure if this would be your first choice. It looks kind of small, and it's more off to the side. And again, there's no indication that the killer went into the living room. Presumably, he would have went into bedroom 2A. And just looking at bedroom 2A, I mean, there's a nice little space right here to situate a desk. A nice closet. It appears to me to be a little bit bigger than the other bedroom. That's logical that he would have walked directly in there. And the staircase is right there. So perhaps he goes into the bedroom on the second floor, commits those murders, sees the staircase. It's right in his face. And so he goes up and happens to find Madison and Kaylee on the third floor. And this is the layout of the third floor. There's a bedroom right here, and going off to the side, there's another bedroom right here. This would presumably be the larger of the 2 bedrooms, and the murders were committed. Now, after he commits murders 3 and 4, he goes back down the stairs And reasons why he didn't go down to the first floor, I just think that it wouldn't have been all that convenient. There's a large open space. There's not a lot of security in there. There's not a lot of knowledge of what he's walking into. He doesn't have a great understanding of the layout of the house, perhaps, and just doesn't want to chance it. He just murdered 4 people, so he leaves the same way that he entered, through this glass sliding door. And that's really what we know. There's going to be a lot more information coming out, and we're certainly going to be following this case as it progresses to trial and as more information comes out. And we are going to be talking about this case at length when the TLP crew comes back to join us later on this week. But as of right now, we have a suspect in mind. The police believe that this is their guy. Although they are being very tight-lipped about the information that they have made no secret that this is the guy that they were looking for. This is the guy that they 100% believe committed these murders. And although he's innocent until proven guilty, it doesn't appear from what's come out that law enforcement is actively searching for anybody else, although they are actively seeking tips about anything that may be known about Mr. Kohberger. We're going to be speaking about this in a great level of depth and start looking into more of what comes out over the coming days regarding Mr. Kohberger about these murders. But we're certainly going to be following this case, and we urge you to tune in later this week when we discuss the case more fully. But until then, thank you so much for joining us, and please be safe out there. Please keep your doors locked, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you all for listening to the entire podcast. We really do appreciate that. And as always, you can find us on YouTube on the Tilted Lawyer Podcast YouTube channel or on your podcast carrier of choice. If you feel we've presented anything of value, please leave a 5-star rating, like, and subscribe. We always appreciate that kind of thing. And we do look forward to seeing you all again live every Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. We love you all. Take care. Bye-bye.